Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 1973. We're going to be taking a look at Marc Bolan and T-Rex, and they're going to be playing through Get It On. So let's get Mark and the guys up on screen and see how they get on.
The teeth of the hider upon you. Dirty, sweet, and you're my girl. Get it on! Bang it down! Get it on! Get it on! Bang it down! Get it on! Like a car, you gotta have diamond star halo. You'll be like a car. You're not tame, you, that's the truth. With your cloak full of eagles, you're dirty, sweet, and you're mine. Get it on, bang it down, get it on. Get it on, bang it down. You got the blues in your shoes and your stockings. You're Indian wide open. Dance when you walk, so let's dance. Take a chance, understand me, baby. You're dirty, sweet, and you're my girl. Get it on, bang it down, get it on, yeah. Get it on, bang it down. Get it on! Come on, America! Get it on!
I'm just going to jump in here because we've got a lot going on here. The full band setup, having rhythm guitar underneath Mark's guitar, means that he can go off into those solos. He's still going to get a full sound. Unfortunately, I'm going to talk about the mix because we don't get a great deal of Mark's guitar in his solo. It's not sitting on top of the mix, it's right in there. So to hear it, you have to try and find it. One thing that is high in the mix is the tambourine, or should I say tambourines, because we have three going on here, and Gloria Jones, as we can see on backing vocals as well, has got her tambourine, and she goes straight in from the beginning of the track, just straight into that tambourine, laying into it. So I think maybe her mic is a little bit high in the mix, certainly when we get to the chorus, and she leans into that last note of the phrase. It's really high in the mix, and it just needed to be taken down a little bit because that would have helped with the tambourines as well. But I think sometimes when Gloria stops playing the tambourine and we only have one, it's set up pretty well mix-wise, but it's so tough to do, especially on the fly with the Midnight Special, considering this is live. And just turning the attention to Mark playing and singing at the same time and chopping in that classic rhythm that he did on so many of his tracks, really abrupt in terms of those palm mutes that he brings in, but gives the playing and the chords so much personality, and just his creativity in general, musically, but also being a poet and going off and doing so many other things, writing. But the way that he put together songs and the melody within songs, that was the killer, because having lots of songs is one thing, having lots of great songs is another thing entirely. And Mark was one of those guys that could write hit after hit after hit. And we're talking early 70s here, right at the beginning of the glam movement, but it was because of Mark and also his good friend David Bowie. Of course, if Mark dressed up, put on loads of makeup, and had this glam look, but then wasn't a very good artist or performer or guitarist, of course it wouldn't have worked. Whereas Marc had the musical ability, as we can hear when he goes off into the solo, even though it's low in the mix, he's doing unison bends, he's vibratoing at the top of the bends, so it means that he has that technical ability on his instrument to play lead guitar, and being this comfortable on the fretboard is in part due to the fact that he started playing when he was 9 years of age. That's when he got his first guitar, and he started a band at school, and his first band had Helen Shapiro as the vocalist, and she went on to have a couple of hits here in the UK called Walking Back to Happiness and You Don't Know, and it's interesting because she was only 14 years of age when she recorded those, so that would have been only 2 years after she was singing for Marc Bolan's school band. Unfortunately, Marc got expelled from school for bad behaviour when he was only 15, but then at the age of 17 he got his first manager, and at the age of 18 he signed to Decca Records, and that was in 1965, so he had a great start musically at a very young age. So he recorded his first single called The Wizard, and that had the Ladybirds as backing vocalists, and they went on to find fame with Benny Hill. He also had Big Jim Sullivan, the session player, on that, and also another guitarist called Jimmy Page. And unfortunately, the songs that he recorded at this time failed to get into the charts, so it wasn't the best start to his musical career, but he was only 18 at this time. So undeterred, having not made it in the charts, Marc went to Simon Napier Bell's house, and Simon opened the door, and Marc said that he was going to be a big star and needed help with the arrangement of everything. And by the way, Simon was a record producer and a band manager at the time, and two of the bands that he did manage were the Yardbirds and also John's Children. And he invited Marc in, listened to some of the demos that Marc had, and was impressed, and immediately booked in some studio time just so that they could get these tracks down in a basic form. So Simon's plan initially was to get Marc into the Yardbirds, but the other band that he managed, John's Children, needed a songwriter, and he knew that Marc could write songs, so he was more suited to John's Children. And they were great live, and they could pull a crowd, put on a great show, but unfortunately they didn't sell a lot of records. So with the record label, unfortunately that's a no-no, so the band fell apart and collapsed, and unfortunately the record label held all of their gear, all of their amps and instruments, so they were left without anything after that record deal was terminated. But Marc wasn't going to get put off, and he got stuck into setting up his own band, Tyrannosaurus Rex, and this was before it was abbreviated. And he had a gig on a Wednesday night, and he put an advert in the Melody Maker, which used to be an old magazine here in the UK that had a section where you could advertise for band members, and the only problem was that his gig was on a Wednesday night and the Melody Maker came out on Wednesday. So it meant that he was literally auditioning people on the same day that he had the gig in the evening. So as you can imagine, they had no time to rehearse, and it was just a nightmare. He got booed off stage, and unfortunately it really affected Marc's confidence, as you can imagine, getting booed off stage. So he kept the drummer that he auditioned, and he was Steve Peregrine Took, and they turned it more into a folk kind of setup, just a duo. So the original version of Tyrannosaurus Rex released 3 albums and 4 singles, and they even got as high as number 15 in the charts. That was their highest charting position, and they were helped out by John Peel at BBC Radio 1, and he was a DJ that helped so many bands get exposure across so many different genres, but look into John Peel if you get a chance. So at age 23 is when Marc started to introduce more electric guitar into the duo's music, and he bought a Fender Stratocaster in white, and he also married his girlfriend at this point, and she was the secretary to the manager of Syd Barrett. So she had connections in the industry and really helped to build up the profile of Marc within the industry. And in the same year, 1970, is when Marc released Ride a White Swan, and this was a game changer because it was a more electric sound, moving away from the acoustic sound that he'd played previously. And this is a track that was released in 1970, and it was a bit of a slow burner in terms of it grew on people and eventually made it all the way up to number 2 in the charts in 1971. So, following the success of Ride a White Swan in 1971, Marc added 2 more members to the band, so they were now a 4-piece, and they recorded Hot Love, and that got to number 1 in the charts. And straight after that, he released this track, Get It On, and that went to number 1 as well. He also released Jeepster after that, and that got to number 2 in the charts. So he had a prolonged period in 1971 at the top of the UK charts, and the way that Marc looked and the things that he would wear when he played live gave rise to the whole glam movement, and that, especially with David Bowie in there as well, really gave the music industry a whole different look as to what was at the top of the charts. And like I mentioned before, Marc and David were great friends, and they shared a manager who was called Les Conn. But both had that similar electric guitar sound in their music too, but were 2 totally original performers, and I think that rivalry was just something that was industry-led and not necessarily on a personal level between the 2. And just before we get back into the performance, this song got to number 10 in the US charts, so it was Marc's highest charting song over there, and they changed the name of the song because over there it was called Bang a Gong, Get It On, because there was an American band called The Chase who had a song that was called Get It On, so it had to change it for the US release. But let's get back into this performance. I'm just going to jump in here. The link to this is going to be in the description below, so you guys can check out the whole video if you want to, the whole performance, because it is getting that festival feel to it, the way that it's obviously ad-libbed in certain parts of the track like we've got here, but also the energy that's in the performance as well, and Marc just covering all of the stage. And another thing I want to mention about Marc is his voice, because when you're thinking about all the hits that he wrote and the unique sound that he got. The vocal was so much a part of that. And I also love the way that Marc throws that vocal over to the backing singers and then gets it back, and he's singing the same range. So it just shows how much range he had at the top end of his voice. And that voice gives all of his songs such a unique quality. You instantly know when it's Marc singing. And think about some of those tracks. We had Children of the Revolution, another legendary track. We had I Love the Boogie, another legendary one, 20th Century Boy. And also Metal Guru. That track kept Elton John from the top spot because Elton at the time was at number 2 with Rocket Man. So it just shows Marc's popularity and how many great songs he wrote over a relatively short period because he wasn't here a hell of a lot of time, unfortunately. So there's this buzz of activity and success in the early 70s for Marc and T-Rex, and by 1975 the original band had disintegrated, but Marc brought in other players and continued to record and release singles. And in 1975 onwards, unfortunately his marriage had broken down as well because of his affair with Gloria Jones, who's on backing vocals in this video. And in 1976 and 1977, the last year of his life, he did have a show here in the UK that was a 6-part series where established bands would come on and play Marc Bolan hits. So unfortunately, 1977, like I mentioned, was the year of the crash that claimed his life. And just to mention the crash, because Marc died instantly, he was only 29 years of age, and Gloria was driving at the time, and it was a Mini 1275 GT that they were in, and they hit a humpback bridge, and then went off and hit, I think it was a post or something like that, and then a tree, and I think that's what did it. And unfortunately, if you've seen the Mini 1275 GT, they are not built for safety, and it's ironic because the reason that he hadn't actually got a driving license, Marc had a fear of a premature death, so he didn't learn to drive. And another thing was, he did actually own other cars, even though he didn't have a license, and one of those was a white Rolls Royce, and that, on the night of this accident, was being lent to a band called Hawkwind. So I don't know whether that would have been the car that they normally would have taken, or whether the Mini would just be the normal vehicle, but maybe it was just for that night. And one of those tragic situations that we didn't get to see what Marc would have been capable of later in his career, and the fact that he had such a short space of time in the mainstream in terms of being at the top of those charts and writing so many hits, considering the amount of time they had actually been around. It was only a case of 10 years, or from 70 to 75 was where all that buzz happened, and he wrote so many great songs. But another artist that has taken way too early. But thank you so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!